The air in the Rage Room arcade hung thick with the ghosts of shattered porcelain and expelled frustrations. It was a cacophony of echoes, even when empty, the phantom screams, the imagined crash of ceramic against concrete. Dean, a cashier by trade, a graduate by diploma, and a debt-ridden soul by circumstance, breathe it in every day. A year out of college, and his grand career was measuring out plates for people to smash, their grievances roaring into the padded walls. He watched them, a parade of the overwhelmed, the stressed executive, the jilted lover, the teenager failing algebra. They pay their money, pick their weaponry, plates, vases, old electronics. And for 20 glorious minutes, they'd scream until their throats were raw, then emerge, red-faced and oddly serene. Dean just counted the money, the weight of his own student loans a silent, suffocating presence. On a particularly dismal Tuesday, the footfall was less a parade and more a lonely crawl. The fluorescent lights hummed a weary tune over empty halls. Mr. Albert, Dean's supervisor, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with the sourness of curdled milk, found him polishing a counter already gleaming. "Dean, what is this? A library? Get some ads going, flyers, social media, do something." Albert tossed a stack of brochures at him, then stalked off, leaving a faint scent of stale coffee and resentment in his wake. The brochures felt like rocks in Dean's hands. Advertise. How could he advertise something he barely tolerated? Something that felt like a mockery of his own stagnant life? The Rage Room was a pressure valve for others, but for him, it was just another cage. The student loan statement on his kitchen table, the rejection letters from countless job applications, Albert's sneering face, it all began to churn in his gut, a slow, toxic acid. An idea, both desperate and forbidden, began to form. Why not him? Just once, a quick blast, a release. He locked the cash register, flipped the closed sign, and chose the largest of the smashing rooms. The door clanged shut behind him, plunging him into a padded silence that was more unnerving than the usual din. He picked up a stack of plates, their edges smooth and innocent. He imagined his student loan statement, the sheer, crushing weight of it. He hurled a plate. It exploded against the wall, a satisfying crack. He roared, a sound he barely recognized as his own. He pictured Albert's condescending smirk. Another plate. Smash. As a few more plates disintegrated, a strange stillness descended. The air, thick with ceramic dust, seemed to coalesce. In the dim light, a shadow detached itself from the padded wall, growing, shifting. It had no discernible form, no eyes or mouth, yet Dean felt an intense, burning presence. It was the color of bruised thought, a swirling vortex of deep purple and angry red, edged with an oily, shifting black. It pulsed, a silent heartbeat of pure, distilled rage. It wasn't a demon in the classic sense, not with horns or a tail, but something far more insidious. It was a manifestation of the very emotion that fueled this place. It spoke without a sound, a thought impressed directly into his mind, cold as ice, clear as a bell. "You wish to be free?" Dean stumbled back, his breath catching in his throat. He tried to speak, but no words came. The price of freedom is small. The entity pulsed, its form seeming to shimmer, to inhale the leftover anger in the room. Picture your burden. Smash 6 plates. Picture your desire. Smash 6 more. A terrifying, exhilarating temptation surged through Dean. This was more than just catharsis. This was a deal. It felt wrong, profoundly, chillingly wrong, but the lure of relief was a siren song too potent to resist. He thought of Albert, the constant belittling, the crushing burden of his presence. He picked up another 6 plates. Each smash was a declaration, a silent promise. Then he pictured himself, free, thriving, respected. 6 more plates met their violent end. Each shard seemed to glint with a sinister satisfaction. The entity rippled, then slowly, gracefully, retracted back into the wall, leaving only the lingering smell of ozone and a profound quiet. Dean stood amidst the wreckage, trembling, a strange mix of terror and exhilarating lightness filling him. The rage was gone, replaced by a chilling clarity. The next morning, the call came. Albert, an unfortunate incident. A distracted driver, a sudden swerve, a concrete barrier. Dean felt a sickening lurch in his stomach, a cold dread twisting around his heart. Guilt, sharp and icy, pierced him. But beneath it, a tiny, insidious warmth began to spread, the warmth of possibility. He was promoted. The near supervisor. His desk, once a cluttered wasteland, felt different. The rage room, now his domain, hummed with a new, darker energy. He found himself watching the customers differently. They're screaming, they're smashing. He saw the raw fuel, the delicious offering. Sometimes late at night, alone in the quiet hum of the arcade, he wonders. He feels the faint echo of that entity, a whisper at the edge of his perception, a dark promise. He knows the price isn't fully paid. Not yet. He wonders when the debt collector will come for him, when the ultimate price will be exacted. He wonders if the joy of freedom, bought so cheaply and so cruelly, will ever truly be worth the terrible cost of his own soul. And as another customer slams their rage into the wall, Dean smiles, a slow, unsettling curve of his lips, knowing that some catharsis comes with a far heavier consequence than shattered ceramic. The ritual was never called a ritual. In my family, we called it the release. It happened once every generation, always quietly, always indoors, always after dinner. The adults would lower their voices, the windows would be checked twice. Someone would turn the radio on low, not for music, but to fill the room with a sound that made listening harder. I was 12 the first time I heard about it. My grandmother had just died. Natural causes, they said. Peaceful, relieved. That second word came up a lot. She finally had her release, my mother said, not quite looking at me. I didn't understand then. I thought grief just made people say strange things. I learned the truth years later when it was my turn to be prepared. The release wasn't about death. It was about catharsis, the kind therapists talked about, the kind people paid money for, the kind that promised relief through emotional purging. In our family, the belief was simple. Pain doesn't disappear. It moves. Every generation carried its share: trauma, grief, rage, regret, war memories, abuse, loss, the things that stuck and poisoned people slowly. But once in a while, someone could take it all. One person absorbed everything so the rest could live lighter. They called that person the vessel. They called the rest of it love. I was told this by my aunt in her kitchen, late at night, hands wrapped around a mug she didn't drink from. "You've always been sensitive," she said gently. "You feel things deeply. That's a gift." My stomach tightened. "You'll help us heal," she added. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to leave. Instead, I nodded. Because that's what we did in my family. We nodded. They didn't rush it. Weeks passed. Conversations became careful around me, kinder, like I was already fragile. They told stories, old ones, stories they'd never shared before, fights, secrets, regrets, things they'd buried for decades. Each confession left them lighter. Each one left me heavier. I started having headaches, then dreams, not images, feelings, raw, unfiltered emotion with no context. Shame that wasn't mine, fear with no face. I asked my mother if this was normal. She smiled sadly. "It means it's working." The night of the release, we gathered in my grandmother's house. Same living room, same chairs, same radio humming quietly in the corner. They sat in a circle. I sat in the center, no candles, no symbols, just expectation. My uncle spoke first. "I'm ready," he said. He looked at me, eyes bright, hopeful. He told me everything, not the sanitized version, the real one, the violence, the guilt, the things he'd never admitted, even to himself. As he spoke, something opened inside me. Not a sound, not a crack, a space. I felt his pain rush in, hot, choking, intimate. My breath hitched. My hands clenched. When he finished, he exhaled like he'd just surfaced from deep water. "Thank you," he whispered. The next person spoke. Then another. With each confession, I felt myself filling. My chest burned. My thoughts blurred. Tears streamed down my face without any clear reason. They didn't stop. They told me everything. And with every word, they grew calmer, happier, clean. By the end, I couldn't stand. My legs trembled as if they didn't belong to me. My heart raced, then slowed, then raced again. My mother knelt in front of me. "This is the hardest part," she said softly. "Afterward, it settles." "Where does it go?" I asked. She hesitated. "Into you," she said, "where it can't hurt anyone else." I wanted to scream, but I couldn't find my voice. They helped me to the couch, covered me with a blanket. The radio volume was turned up slightly. The release was over. They slept well that night. I didn't sleep at all. I lay there, drowning in emotions that weren't mine. Grief layered on grief, rage stacked on shame. There was no separation, no filter, just everything. In the morning, they looked better, lighter, kinder, whole. They hugged me carefully, like I might break. "You did so well," my aunt said. "You saved us," my mother added. I smiled because that's what love looked like in my family. Weeks passed, then months. The emotions didn't fade. They settled, deep, permanent. I became quieter, heavier, slower. I laughed less, felt less joy, less anger, less anything that belonged solely to me. Doctors couldn't explain it. Therapists tried. Medication dulled the edges but left the weight. My family flourished. Marriages improved. Old grudges vanished. Laughter came easier. They invited friends over more, took photos, made plans. Sometimes they looked at me with something like gratitude, sometimes with relief. No one asked how I was. They didn't need to. I was the proof. Years later, my niece asked me why I never married. I didn't know how to tell her that I was already full, that there was no room left for another person's pain or love. One night, I overheard my sister speaking quietly to her husband. "She's getting tired," she said. "We'll have to think about the next generation soon." Something cold slid through me. The release wasn't a one-time thing. It was a cycle. I understood then why my grandmother had looked so peaceful at the end. Not because she was free, but because she was emptying out. I sit alone now, decades later, writing this because it's the only place I can put anything. I feel them inside me. All of them. Their mistakes. Their suffering. Their relief. They live well because I don't. They sleep because I stay awake. And one day I'll be asked to pass it on, to choose someone else, to offer them catharsis. They'll call it love. They'll say it's necessary. And I know the truth now. Catharsis doesn't erase pain. It concentrates it. And the cruelest part isn't that one person suffers. It's that everyone else gets to forget that suffering ever existed. The apartment still smelled like success. Leather, expensive cologne, the particular mustiness of unworn designer clothes suffocating in dry cleaning bags. Max sat in the dark, surrounded by the architecture of his delusions, and waited for something that would never arrive. Catharsis? The word tasted like copper on his tongue. He'd read about it once in college, back when literature seemed more useful than spreadsheets. The Greeks had a name for it. The purging of emotions, the release that comes after unbearable tension. Tragedies were supposed to provide it. The hero falls, the audience weeps, and somehow, in that communal witnessing of destruction, everyone goes home lighter. Max's phone sat silent on the glass coffee table. $3,200, imported from Milan. purchased the same week he'd stopped answering calls from his sister. The silence was worse than the ringing had been. At least the calls had suggested he still existed to someone, even if only as a debtor, a mark, a voice to be worn down until it agreed to payment plans that would extend past his natural death. The pretension had started small, almost innocent. Working at Henderson and Associates, he'd noticed how the partners spoke differently to clients who arrived in German sedans versus Japanese compacts. Money recognized money, they said. Money trusted its own kind. What they didn't say was that poverty could smell desperation through 3 layers of knockoff gabardine. So Max had left, started his own firm. The logic was crystalline. He was smarter than his colleagues, more precise, more dedicated. Their mediocrity had been contagious, infecting his potential like mold through drywall. Alone, he'd flourish. Alone, excellence would announce itself. For 8 months, his office. A converted bedroom in a building where the elevator only worked on alternate Tuesdays. Hosted exactly 11 clients. Retirees with simple returns, a part-time Etsy seller. People who paid in checks that sometimes bounced, who apologized for taking up his time, who treated him like they were doing him the favor. The Amex arrived with a $50,000 limit and a letter that began, "Congratulations, you've been selected." Max had stared at it for 3 days before using it. The Tom Ford suit came first, then the Montblanc pen. The Bruno Magli shoes that pinched his feet but photographed beautifully for his website About Me section. Each purchase felt like medicine, temporary relief. The anxiety would recede for hours, sometimes a whole day, before returning with compound interest. He created an Instagram presence at MaxChenCPA, photos of his wrists beside leather-bound ledgers, breakfast meetings at hotels he couldn't afford to stay in. The aesthetic of wealth meticulously curated, each image alive at cost money to tell. And then, impossibly, it worked. Marcus Delacroix found him through a referral from someone Max had never met. Old money, the kind that didn't need to announce itself, seeking discreet boutique service. The retainer alone would cover 3 months of Max's mounting minimum payments. But by then, the calls had started. Not the polite reminders from credit card companies. These were different. Collection agencies with names that sounded vaguely governmental. Voices that called at 6 a.m. and 11 p.m. that knew his mother's maiden name, his college roommate's address, details about his life that felt like violations even though he had signed papers permitting exactly this level of intrusion. The calls colonized his concentration. He'd be mid-calculation and his phone would vibrate, and the numbers would scatter like roaches in sudden light. Even when he didn't answer, the possibility of the ring created a Pavlovian dread that made his hands shake. His vision blur, his mind loop endlessly through payment scenarios that never quite resolved. The mistakes were inevitable. A decimal point drifting 1 space left. A schedule attached to the wrong form. Transpositions and omissions, and the particular errors that only emerge when the human mind fractures under sustained assault. Marcus's lawsuit arrived by courier, delivered by a young man in a uniform who said, "Sorry, dude," before Max even opened the envelope. 6 other clients followed within 72 hours, a domino chain of professional destruction. The court date was set for March 15th. The Ides, Max noted without humor, but he'd stopped tracking time in conventional increments. Days were measured in phone calls, weeks, and open bills he couldn't bear to read completely. His debt had metastasized to $680,000, a number so large it ceased to feel real, like the distances between stars. He'd imagined, during those final weeks before the inevitable judgment, that there would be some moment of release, a breaking point where tears would come, or rage, or even the animal comfort of total surrender. He waited for it the way parched men wait for rain. It never came. Instead, there was only the accumulation. More court dates, more judgments, More certified letters that piled on his imported coffee table, like evidence of crimes he had committed against himself. The luxury items remained, too expensive to sell for what they'd actually fetch, too shameful to wear. Max thought often about tragedy, about those Greek plays where heroes gouged out their own eyes or were torn apart by gods or fate. At least their suffering meant something. It taught lessons. It purified through pity and fear. His own destruction taught nothing, purified nothing. There was no chorus to bear witness, no audience to experience vicarious release. Just the endless, suffocating weight of consequences without conclusion, punishment without redemption, a story that refused to end because endings implied resolution. The apartment grew dark around him. Outside, the city hummed with other people's lives. People who'd made different choices, or the same choices with better luck, or no conscious choices at all. People who might stumble, might fall, but who somehow found ways to get back up, to start over, to experience that mythical unburdening that grief or forgiveness or simple exhaustion might bring. Max sat in his leather chair. Genuine, full grain, financed at 26% APR, and understood with crystalline horror that some falls have no bottom, some weights never lift. Some stories never grant their protagonists the mercy of catharsis, leaving them suspended in eternal falling action that never quite resolves into peace. His phone began to ring again in the darkness. He didn't answer it, but he didn't turn it off either.